Okay, there we go. We're going. Okay, so we should start going live now. And I will check.
Gone.
Yeah, well, you know, it's all those little details that always get us. So I
You
check
can hear
everything 3
me.
times.
You can hear me. I can hear you.
These are good things.
I can see you. You can see me.
Let's see. I guess
Can anyone out there see us?
So it looks like, yes, we're good on YouTube.
Hello, YouTube.
Let's see here. Does not look like. Oh, shoot. All right, I'm going to shut it down. We'll be back. Technical difficulties. Okay. All right. Now, hopefully, we're really live. We'll see.
Ooh,
Is this going to work?
4 minutes to spare.
Well, not really yet.
Oh. Well, at least you
right.
have 4 minutes.
It looks like YouTube is happy. It looks like Periscope is catching up. And then I just need to check Facebook. Okay, why am I hearing myself twice again?
You always do.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, the voices in my head, they talk a little loud sometimes.
When I start hearing them, we're all in trouble.
Yeah, that's one thing you don't need.
No.
So have you adjusted to life without people bringing you food and drinks?
And beverages, yes, except for the, the shedding of the skin like I'm some kind of reptile. Oh.
That's a very first world problem.
My name is Marianne, but the short is Mare, and sort of I'm like a horse because I'm leaning up against every corner of the house and scratching my back. It's just attractive. It's so attractive. It is. You'll use any implement when your back itches and you can't get to it.
That's for sure. All right. So, yes, with 3 minutes to spare, it looks like we are live across the board here. So, welcome, everybody. This is our pre-show pre-check to make sure that everything is working because, well, most of the time something isn't. And,
oh, my goodness.
Mare is adjusting to life without people bringing her food and beverages and waiting on her hand and foot.
And on top of that, we have this whole daylight savings thing.
Oh, I know.
Which
when
is
are we going to stop this?
I don't know. It's kind of a ridiculous thing, but it's like I'm just trying to adjust to that as well, trying to get, less sleep and not sleeping at night. And it's all good, though.
I just, I have enough time with enough trouble with daylight. I really don't need them messing with it even more.
Yeah, I know. I know. I'm investing
fair.
in melatonin companies, just to try to get a good night's sleep. We've only got like 2 minutes.
I never, had ever tried that, but the vet had me giving that to Bailey to help her with some issues. And then, of course, after she was gone, I had like bottles and bottles of it all over the place. So I've started trying to take it. I don't know if it's really doing anything, but I figure, well, it's better than just throwing it out.
It actually does work. I think it works if you take it sort of like an hour before you go to sleep. It sort of starts to get your body ready for sleep. It doesn't help that we're probably playing with all our tech toys, before we go to sleep, and the lights and everything disturb everything. But, such is life.
There's always going to be...
Can't leave the toys alone.
That's for sure. I mean, geez, the toys is what it's all about.
Well, if it's not that, I'm out there reading on my Kindle.
Right.
So it's
not
there's something...
one thing, it's another.
That's right.
What was that?
That's
Rosanna Dana, right?
Rosanna Dana.
I'm aging
that
myself
little
again.
sweat ball on the end of your nose. Oh my God, I loved her.
Yeah, she was phenomenal. Okay, let's see.
1 minute till we're live. Oh, actually, it is 9 o'clock.
Oh, okay, cool.
Is your pre-checking done, dear?
Yes, we are set to go. If you would like to do the big welcome, go right for it.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the BA Zones live show. Tonight, we're going to be talking about ambiguity and scope creep. And if you don't know what scope creep is, God bless you. But you'll either you haven't experienced it or you have, and you're just in a corner somewhere. But we're going to discuss what it is and explain what it is and how ambiguity really affects it. And before we get into that, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Marianne Morrison.
And I am Kathleen Sinnott.
And we are co-founders of the BA Zone. I'm taking over your spot tonight.
No, go for it.
And co-founders of the BA Zone, everything business and analytics analysis. And we're here to help you with anything that you need. And if you have any suggestions or requests, feel free to comment as we're talking during the show. And Kathleen will let us know you're on.
Yes, I think
Anything?
We've actually got the. Oh, here we go. See, Amy's on. Hi, Amy. Okay,
Hi, Amy.
I'm gonna really try here because I think I got everything working again. Let's see. Woohoo! Amy, you arrived just in time to hear you talking about scratching your back. Because it's all about timing in life.
It is. I would almost pay someone to do it at this point, you know.
And then more on topic, she said scope creep is prevalent in legal project management, which I would imagine, since a lot of lawyers' approach to things is dragging their feet.
Well, and there's so many contracts out there with ambiguous language that can slow things down.
That's how they stay employed, I'm guessing, right? Nice work if you can get it.
Don't give all her secrets away. All right, why don't we get started? I'm just going to throw up a couple slides first before we just start talking, just to get everybody on a level set. And again, this is where you can reach us. We're on all the favorite places here at thebazone.com, on Instagram, Periscope, Facebook, and YouTube. Those are all the ways you can find us and get in touch with us. Okay. So, continuing along with the psychology of business analysis, ambiguity and scope creep. And the two often go hand in hand. So what is ambiguity? Ambiguity occurs when details are missing, unclear, or confusing, which allows for more than one interpretation or meaning. So we have a couple of cute examples, some of my favorite examples on the next slide, actually. But one of them is an ambiguous statement that was in the news several years ago. I think Jay Leno did a bit on it. Queen Mary having bottom scraped. Well, we know that it wasn't the actual queen. It was the ship, the Queen Mary's bottom, who was being scraped. And that's just an ambiguous statement. No parking, violators will be towed. Well, the actual violators aren't towed. Their cars will be towed. But again, an ambiguous statement. And one of my all-time favorites that came off of a medical symptom checklist, unable to eat diarrhea. So there should be probably two check boxes for that one, unable to eat and a symptom of diarrhea, but you know, whatever you're into. But those are just some funny examples of ambiguity. How they affect your project is probably a more serious matter. So let's just go over what project scope is for those of you who are new BAs. The project scope actually establishes and outlines and documents the project goals, the deliverables, the tasks, responsible parties involved, the deadlines and cost, and you know how many days. And there's other information, but that's the main gist of the scope of a project. You're just documenting what is in and out of scope. So what we're putting into this project and what we are absolutely leaving out, which is very important to document what is out of scope as well. And we'll get to that in a little while. Scope creep is actually the unauthorized addition of features or functions or changes beyond what was approved in that project scope. The project scope typically, it can be adjusted, but you know, it stays pretty standard. And scope creep in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing, as long as we approve it and get it authorized, because it does have a lot of downstream effects potentially. So tonight we're going to look at some of the causes of that ambiguity and scope creep, and some of the tips that you can do to kind of bail yourself out of those ambiguous situations.
Right, and I just want
So
to
the,
jump in here
go ahead.
just so to clarify for the people who are maybe newer to this type of terminology. Um, you want to be careful not to slap somebody's hand calling it scope creep if it's something that has come out of the discovery process of the original scope. It's really more
Correct.
when they're trying to like bolt things on or slip things in that maybe had been not included originally for a reason, or just hadn't been brought up or whatever. So there's a very fine line, and it's a little tough in the beginning sometimes to tell. So that's why you would go to the rest of your team to try to get some insight on it. But sometimes it's just things need to change because of the discovery process, and sometimes it's changing because people are trying to shove things in. It's a
Yes, and we're going to deal
challenge.
we're going to deal mainly with the shove things in part
Yes,
tonight.
that's what we're focusing on tonight. The other ones we've covered and we'll go into again later.
That's right, absolutely. So let's
Okay.
just go over some of these causes of ambiguity and where they might come from. Um, for starters, management can cause ambiguity by creating unrealistic scopes or timelines because they're either trying to obtain a new client or retain customers. It happens all the time. They sort of make promises, we're going to give you the gold standard, and we as BAs, project managers, everyone has to deal with the aftermath of that, and try to get people to move timelines, add resources. But management can be a cause of that. The project team. If you have a project team, a lot of businesses either aren't big enough or just don't have project management teams. So a lot of that stuff falls on the BA. So part of ambiguity is the lack of the definition of the actual scope of the project. It's either not detailed enough, it's very vague, it's ambiguous, and it's not outlined in any type of formal way. And there's also project management can underestimate or create unrealistic timelines based on the number of resources that we have at hand, and the time allotted to do that. And as business analysts, you'll find, if you haven't already, that a lot of the upfront business analysis work they give very little time to, and that is really part of the most important part to make sure, and that keeps everything running smoothly, that we don't miss anything and we have to rework at the end of a project. But you sort of have to fight for that time allotment in many, many cases. Um, Development can be a cause of ambiguity. They will, as developers will like to do, they may jump the gun and begin developing before we even have a cost analysis or requirements completed. Um, so a lot of times you have to bring developers in at the right time, obviously, but they will cause ambiguity because they'll already have built something that we may not need, or may not show up in a different, may show up in a later phase. Um, a business analysts can also cause ambiguity. Most of that is around the elicitation process and requirements documentation. So there could be a lack of an inconsistent process when you're doing your elicitation. That in itself will cause you to miss things or misinterpret things, especially if you're not getting an entire team together of all of the players, all of the key stakeholders involved. There could be a lack of clarity in your requirements, lack of details, lack of foresight. As business analysts, we often have to think of different scenarios and create potential solutions or optional solutions for those scenarios. And if you don't have the foresight to think of all those different things, you can create ambiguity. Um, and again, interpretation based on a limited view of perspective or needs. So if you're only talking to particularly one person, maybe a key stakeholder in a department, you may be missing some departments. You may be missing other views within the same department. So it's very important to get the broadest perspective. You may also be dealing with not only clients, but vendors or suppliers as well. And getting their interpretation and their needs met and their perspective is also important. And if you don't, ambiguity can occur. Um, developers or the entire team may actually cause ambiguity by bypassing the approval process. So requests sometimes come in from users and they say, oh, you know what? It's just a small little thing. And we get that a lot. We get a lot of small little requests coming in. Um, if it's a tweaking of a text or a label, it's probably not an issue. If during, like Kathleen was saying, during the discovery phase, if we have to maybe replace one thing of equal value with another, not a big thing. But sometimes all these little tiny small things add up and cause a lot of downstream concern and ambiguity. And it can happen as it bumps up against other phases of the project, as it bumps up against QA, training, what have you. It can cause a lot of problems. Also an issue, not only bypassing just by putting in these little pieces, is when sometimes the customer has direct contact between clients and either developers or just the team in general. It can cause a lot of ambiguity if someone has a beeline, a main line, the bat phone right into a developer, and of course the developers are going to want to please, and it causes a lot of ambiguous development that can occur with that as well. Customers, whether internal or external customers, sometimes and they may do this on purpose, they may not do this on purpose. Who's to judge? Not I. But they may include extra work that they label as missed requirements or forgotten requirements and they want that work done for the same budget or the same price. That can cause ambiguity. And also the customer underestimating the level of complexity or the number of resources that it's going to take to do this project. Stakeholders can cause ambiguity if we don't have a good communication plan with them. Lack of communication often ends up with woohoo, surprise endings, which are not always good for the customer. So you have to keep a level of communication, and that can be an issue. And also, as far as stakeholders go, lack of stakeholder involvement. You can get key stakeholders into a room, and some of them will give you everything they want, everything they need. Other key stakeholders will sort of sit back and not get involved if they come to meetings at all. That lack of involvement causes ambiguity down the road. As far as the team also goes, the team can change in itself. You can have people change jobs, people change positions, people leave, people come and go. The new people coming on board can cause ambiguity because they're sort of jumping into the middle of something. Expectations that have not been set with the customer or with the team, or visions that are not clear, can cause ambiguity. And finally, when the team provides unrequested functionality, and there's a couple of reasons why this can happen. They need to exceed expectations. Everybody wants to exceed. Everybody gets very excited about what they're doing. They love the challenge, and they want to exceed the expectations and wind up giving functionality that's not requested. Now, or they're ahead of schedule, and they say, you know what, we're ahead of schedule, so this thing that we thought we couldn't put in, let's throw it in. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't work because they may get backed up somewhere later in the phase and have issues with that. No one is prepared for it downstream, QA, etc. So it may put a strain or a stress on them. Sometimes it is a very good thing that they come with functionality that improves everything so much that it is a good thing to put in. But again, if it's unrequested, it should be discussed with the team first and presented to the client to see if that's the way we should go, without just throwing it in there just because we can, because our favorite phrase here is just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that's a good round example of 10 causes for ambiguity. Kathleen, can you think of any others, or do you have anything to add to those? I
Yeah,
was
I'll
just
give you
rattling on.
a
You didn't
chance
stop me.
to have a drink there. Well, and I've got actually got a story to tell. Right? We all love stories. So here's a recent story from my life. I recently joined a project that had been going on for a while before I got there. And so, dove in, been sitting in meetings and trying to get up to speed and all that good stuff. And there was this big push all of a sudden to do this change to a part of the system. I can't get too specific because of NDAs and stuff, but I can tell the general story. So there's, was this big push all of a sudden, okay, drop everything, we got to go take care of this kind of stuff. And it turned out to be exactly this. There had been something that was in the project that everybody thought they understood, but it turned out it was not clearly defined. And so everybody was going in different directions with it, all believing that they had the right picture in their head. And I was lucky because what they were talking about was something I'd actually worked with in a couple of other projects. So by asking a few key questions, I was able to get it to come back. And long story short, it turned out that they actually didn't need what they were asking for, because it turned out that there was a bug in the existing system. Which they would have now spent, the next 6 months not knowing about and building this new system, and still had the client be unhappy because the actual issue hadn't been resolved. And this all came directly out of Ambiguity, which was funny because I knew the show was coming up. And I was sitting in the meeting going, wow, I wish I could have recorded this. It would have been perfect for the show. But,
Yes.
that's the way it goes. I mean, it's one of these things. It's just going to happen, and it's going to keep cropping up, and you just need to always be vigilant and keeping an eye out for it, and make sure that you're asking enough questions so that you feel sure that this is not a situation that you're getting into. Also, right. I just want to bring up here, so Amy is got some things. Let me see. I think she's very kindly helping me test, because I think I've got our comment thing working again. So let me give this a try and see if it works, because I get excited about this stuff. So back to what you were saying earlier, she agrees that best practice is to gather perspective from different roles, which will definitely help you avoid the ambiguity, because by talking to the different roles, you're more likely to bubble it up if you don't see that it's there, because they might say, what are you talking about? Or that doesn't make sense because. So thank you for that, Amy. And then there's one more. Let me see if I can get this to work. I love this one. Oh, it gets cut off a little bit there, but it's, I don't let the attorney speak directly with the service provider and vice versa, as you mentioned, direct access, which is all kinds of trouble. Yes. So there you go. It's not just in our world, it's also in Amy's more legal-focused world. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah. I would think it's pretty darn important in the legal world.
Yeah.
So, yeah, exactly. As Kathleen was saying, as Amy is mentioning as well, we all live...
It seems like she agrees with every single one of your examples. Were you guys talking while I was busy? Is that what the two of you put the list together, right?
I think maybe we've just lived that long that we've experienced all of them. Maybe that's what it is.
Well, it's all our real life experience coming back to us.
Life is ambiguous no matter what we do, right?
Ain't that the truth?
And it's going to come up. Absolutely. As Kathleen said, it's going to come up. As Amy mentioned, it's going to come up. So what are some tips that we can do to reduce the ambiguity? Well, if we're coming from the management's unrealistic scope of timeliness, we can try to have the management or sponsors create a charter. Now, not all of them do this. For big projects, you can create a project charter. It's a short little document that sort of communicates the business need, the vision, the features, some of the functions, and what is in and what is considered out of scope. And that's more of a high level direction. Sometimes project managers will do it on behalf of sponsors or management. We can certainly try to do it as BAs as well too. It's just a tiny short little document, gives a high level overview, just sort of to set everyone level set as to what may begin. And again, as Kathleen was saying, as you go through the discovery page, things will change and morph and will become a little clearer. As BAs, you can also plan ahead based on existing products. If you were either editing, adding features to a product, or if you were maybe licensing a product to a client, you can create sort of implementation spreadsheets at different levels with different timelines based on different products you may have, or levels of automation, or a phased approach. You can start to break that down. And typically, this is also something that might be done by a client manager. But if they haven't done it, it certainly helps you as a BA to have this checklist. And going forward, especially when you're estimating for potentially a project manager, estimating how much time it will take to do something, or if it's a legal issue, perhaps on Amy's side, it's sort of like a cheat sheet of how long certain things might take you to do. So if you have to give that to a project manager, you can keep that scope and timeline, how long it would take. So you have sort of a baseline to go by. Anything to add to that, Kathleen, on the manager's unrealistic scope? No?
No, I think you covered it nicely.
How do we deal with tips for dealing with lack? And I apologize, I'm referring to some notes because I don't have them up on the screen. So if you see me looking over here, I'm not looking at my dog. I am just checking my notes.
Well, if you look at the dog, you have to lift him up so we can all see him.
Yeah, I know. No, he's
we'll
sleeping
bring them up
right
here.
now. There he is. There he
The
is.
pups.
Little Tinky Wink and little Murph. Okay, so lack of formal scope definition. What you can do, if you haven't done, is similar to the charter, but with a lot more detail. You'll see this a lot in contract work. You can provide a statement of work. Work with the client exactly on a statement of work. And that's another document that describes the work in more detail, the requirements, the performance, the design, expectations, any responsibilities. They can be considered, depending on the size of the project, they can be pretty large statement of works, but they're broken out very nicely, and you can refer back to that statement of work as the original scope definition. And again, it'll morph, but you can definitely do that. We kind of consider that statement of work the prenup agreement for the project. Got to have that prenup so you can say, this is what was in and this is sort of what is out. And Amy should like that reference, the prenup. And it's especially important when you're dealing with client teams, vendors and suppliers. Everybody has a role and everybody's involved. So you want to make sure you have a really good, concise statement of work. If the issue is around underestimated or unrealistic number of resources, again, you really have to get down to that scope level and further define what it is, break down the large projects into sub-projects and then into tasks, and specify again what is out of scope, so you can try to get the number of resources lining up with the timeline and the actual tasks that need to be accomplished. If a development is beginning before the cost analysis or the requirements, what you can do there is you can have development try to focus on back-end stuff. Not saying that the back-end stuff won't be affected, the database stuff won't be affected by the requirements, but it's a little safer than having them code upfront, interface. Which can change dramatically depending on what we're doing with the requirements. And the other thing, if you have a formal project management, you can make sure they can't assign any time to that project until it's the requirements have been signed off. So it's in order of that. For elicitation and requirements, as far as foresight goes, you can anticipate their needs and provide the potential options and solutions. And Kathleen and I do this quite often when we're working with a client, and we'll give them 3 options. And Kathleen, you could probably speak to that a little bit while I take a sip of water.
Go for it. Yeah, I'll even take you off there. There you go. So we tend to go with 2 or 3 options for them at the very basic level, It makes them feel more involved, makes them feel like they're a part of the decision making. But it also helps to give them something to compare against. Because sometimes if you just only give them one option, then either, depending on how they're feeling, they're very for it or very against it. You know, maybe they haven't had lunch yet or they have a headache or whatever. Whereas if you're giving them, two or three to look at, and then they can compare and contrast what works. And very often what happens is we end up taking, it's a little bit like, the old Chinese restaurant trip, with the whole group where you take, one from column A and two from column B, and then that comes up with the actual decision for how the whole thing is going to work, how the rules are going to apply, what parts of the UI are going to appear when. But we found that to be very effective to keeping everybody focused rather than, just throwing ideas out there. The other benefit to it, especially the more we can show them visually, even if it's, a spreadsheet with the rules or whether it's a workflow or a task flow or wireframes, giving them something all to look at greatly increases the odds that everybody's agreeing to the same thing and not a different picture in their head that we don't know about. So those are things that we've incorporated into our overall process, and it's been very successful for us. At least I think so.
Right. Yeah, no, it definitely has. I can tell you from the client side it has been. If we're talking about the structure of the requirements, you really want, and the elicitation process, you really need to have a consistent method to elicit the information and to document the information so that you're capturing clear and detailed requirements. Sometimes the requirements that I've seen captured are clear, but they don't necessarily go to the depth of level that they need to. So if you're finding your requirements are clear and concise and still they seem to be ambiguous, you may need to go a level deeper and think of other things that aren't being thought of or give them more detail around a particular item. And again, look for the perspective of the different roles, as we talked about before. Process to approve is bypassed with those small requests. What I would suggest is you create a formal change request process. Now, it doesn't have to be a super overloaded change process request that occurs, but just sort of a once a week or once a month meeting as to, okay, here's a change process. We need this put in place. Can you say why you need it in place and where does it fall, and have them actually tell you where it belongs in the process of everything. So but it make it formal so that somebody doesn't come in on the fly and say, hey, just change this for me, and a developer will. So that level of formality is sort of necessary. It doesn't have to be super like with an octopus with many arms, but at least you have something there. And as I said,
benefit to that, I'm just going to jump in here. So the other benefit to documenting it that way is in 3 months or 6 months or a year, when somebody says, why did we do that? You have something to go back and refer to. And remember why it happened, and maybe even go back to that person if now, there's a problem or it's affecting some other part of the system that maybe you didn't realize at that time was going to be an issue. So it's really good historically to have that kind of information at your fingertips. And as much as everybody says, oh, I'll remember, I don't have to write that down. Write it down. The human brain doesn't remember things as well as we'd like. Actually, it probably does. We just don't know how to access it yet. So by having it written down, that way you'll know for sure that you'll be able to get it. Or if you're out, on a vacation, when this comes up, somebody else will be able to go and find it, which is another perk. That way they won't call you while you're on vacation.
That's right. Exactly. And actually with the change request process, if the change is not implemented now, as Kathleen said, if you document it, you can take all of those that are considered out of scope and lump them together in a future phase. So you already know what the customer, whether it's an internal or external customer, needs, and you can lump them all together then in a different release. For larger projects, obviously, you tell the client, we can give you a cost estimate for that and a timeline. And you will always eventually have to negotiate the delivery dates or reduce the scope in some way if something has to be put into place. Let's see, as far as direct contact between the clients and the developers, this is what we do with every project I've ever worked on, and that is to create one point of contact from the team. It's usually the business analyst from our team, and one point of contact from the client. Because don't forget, a lot of times we work on projects where there is also a client team involved, and they may be coding something on their side or involved in some way, and we are on our side. So it always helps to have one point of contact and one backup, so that that person, if you can't get me, say, you can get Kathleen, instead of giving out all the names and numbers of everyone. I mean, you do have to list who's involved in the project, but you don't necessarily have to give out their phone numbers. And that usually helps to contain that a little bit. Also, you want to identify who the decision makers are in the group, so that if somebody says, I want this in place, well, if you're not the decision maker, we know who to go to talk to see how that's going to affect the scope and the timeline and the cost, et cetera. So you definitely want to identify that decision maker. If customers say that we missed a requirement or we forgot a requirement, ways to handle that is to consider allowing the change in the initial phase, which is the discovery phase that we've been talking about, when those effects are still minimal to the downstream flow. And always use that statement of work as a traceability document to say this was in or this was out. And that's why it's very important to have a document, either a scope document, statement of work document, that you can trace back to say what we had decided. It may not be in there, but at least, if it's a really detailed one, most of it should be. And when you get these requests, have the client identify to you if it's a must-have or if it's a nice-to-have, what we call a nice-to-have. So is it functionality that they really don't need, but it would be a nice-to-have? Those are things that would be pushed to a later phase for sure. The must-haves, again, we have to negotiate on that and focus them back on the bigger picture and try to get them to say, even the must-haves, what is the criticality of that? Can it wait till the next iteration, or does it have to go in this iteration? As far as the client underestimating the level of complexity or time or resources, as Kathleen had mentioned before, the use of diagrams, models, and any other visual aids that will communicate that complexity to them. Oftentimes they have no idea how much hardware is involved or software is involved, and a picture can be worth 1,000 words to say, oh, really, got a lot of people, a lot of things going on here. So whatever it takes to make that point very clear. And again, have the client prioritize the work. Not all of the work, because obviously from a project management perspective, things have to occur in a certain order. But where they can be involved in prioritization of the work, we should involve the client in the prioritization of the work. So again, they feel like they're part, they have a little control over the situation. Stakeholder communication, lack of communication, or updates, or lack of stakeholder involvement. You want to engage the stakeholders using their preference of communication. But in addition to that, you have to send out weekly updates. It is very important to keep the client in the loop. We do that with meetings and with a document, and it's usually to show the progress or the risks associated with the project. Again, project management may handle this. Project management may ask you where you are in a particular process. If there is no project management, it typically falls on the business analyst to provide that update. So you want to make sure that communication is taken care of. You want to collaborate with the client as much as possible. And you want to document the stakeholders' involvement. So if you have weekly meetings, you want to note in meeting notes who attended and who did not attend, and what the approvals were, what the points of dissension were. Folks that don't get involved, that's a definite risk. So you need a contingency plan to that lack of involvement. You may have to go around outside the group to get the information that you need, even though that person's been identified as a key stakeholder. But you want to document everything, because there's been instances where those folks who are typically could be either busy or whatever, or passive aggressive. You have to have it all documented. And when you're talking about these points of dissension or what should be in and out of scope or in and out of requirements, and you have a group, always go with the 80-20 rule. 80% of the people agree, the dissenters, the 10-20, you know what their dissent and why they're dissenting, but you move on and that piece gets approved by the 80%. You can tell everybody that up front, communicate that up front in the beginning of a project so it's not a surprise later. As far as team changes go, if someone leaves the team, it's Kathleen, she jumped, she had somebody leave or jump in the middle, I think she said. So you're going to have to get those people up to speed as quickly as possible. And in the meantime, maybe delegate their tasks to a team member if possible. That's up to date with the information. One of the biggest things, and this is a huge thing in any project, is the setting of expectations. So if expectations have not been set with the client, whether they're internal folks, external folks, and the vision is not clear, it is going to cause all types of problems. So you want to set and manage a client's expectations. You want to establish how requests out of scope are handled upfront. You want to discuss the project plan. You want to review the milestones. You want to constantly communicate and set expectations so that there are no surprises. You want to create visual flows, wireframes, comps, anything that will give them an idea of what the system will look like. Prefaced by the fact that it's not going to be exact, obviously, because, development, web designers get involved, but at least they have something that they can visually look at to say, you're on the right path. And finally, providing unrequested functionality. How do you handle that when folks are really excited and developers want to develop and we want to exceed expectations? It's fine. It's fine as long as it's been properly vetted, approved, processed, set against a timeline, everything is looked at. Or you have to say, it's a great idea, it's fabulous, but hold it until the next iteration or a future release. And those are some of the tips to reduce ambiguity in your project. Kathleen, you have anything to add? I feel like I've been talking all night here.
Yeah, but you're on a roll.
I have.
I'm
on a roll.
This is a sweet spot for you. You've been through a lot of this, and you've had to manage a lot of this.
A lot of it, yeah.
But just to lighten things up a little bit, Amy wanted to let you know that she just scratched her own back with a pair of scissors. For you folks who are just joining, this goes back to the pre-show when we were chatting about the fact that Mary's back from vacation and paying for the fact that she enjoyed herself in the sun.
Sunburn, a pair of scissors. Good Lord, woman, that's a little dangerous. She's a woman on the edge.
She is, she's a risk taker. And she's enjoying the content, which we thank you for that comment, Amy.
Thank you.
And for anybody who thinks that we were kidding about getting the phone calls, oops, wait, I want to go back to that one. This is the one I wanted to show you. We weren't kidding about getting the phone calls on vacation if you don't have things documented in places other than your brain. And Amy backed us up. Of course they will call us on vacation. There are always some that are too lazy to go and try to find it. Absolutely. That's been there, done that, did not appreciate it.
No. You have to actually go far away where they can't get you. Well, which is getting smaller and smaller in today's world, right?
This is the cell phone problem. Like, we're just too available. Now, of course, having been without my cell phone last week, I will take that problem because not having it made me a maniac. I know I'm addicted to it, but oh my goodness. Things like, I'd set myself up with two-factor authentication. This is my two-factor. I couldn't get to it because I didn't have a phone. So I was locked out of stuff. It was traumatic. And so Amy made a comment too, which we should probably mention, that it's important, as far as this whole topic goes, to make sure that you are mentoring the newer BAs on your team about this, and making sure that they're reaching out, and whether they're on your project or another project, make sure that they're being proactive about providing those status updates, because sometimes the ambiguity comes from people feeling uncertain, or people being left out of the loop too long, and their brain starts to reinterpret what the actual plan was. So that's an excellent tip, Amy. Thank you so much for that. You do need to be proactive about making sure that everybody stays up to date, even if you're not needing to pull them into meetings, just making sure that they're still in the loop so that they stay on track with everybody else and don't wander off quietly and you don't even realize that you're in trouble now.
Yeah, we like to create a nice form for that, sort of a four-quadrant type of form, risks and where we are in the process, what was accomplished. And we also use some visual indicators, red, green colors and things like that. And once you set up that status for that newbie, it makes it very easy for them to go around and get the information they need and send a weekly update. More than that, it's not effective more than a weekly update, depending on the project, I think. Wouldn't you agree, Kath?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some rare example out there, where something's under a super crush and things are changing fast, where maybe you might need to do an extra one. But for the most part, once even every 2 weeks, if it's a longer project. It's just important to not let it go too long. You don't want it to go a month or 2 months, and then people are like, is this project still happening? Are they still doing what we talked about? Oh, wait, I've had this other idea, but the voices in my head are the only ones who heard it, So it's important to keep those lines of communication open and keep, reassessing and reconfirming all of the facts so that everybody doesn't forget them. Because it happens. We're human and we get distracted, and most people are working on more than one project at a time. So it's a good safety measure to make sure that you keep doing that and keep, documenting and checking in and verifying that everybody is still agreeing to the same things that they thought they were agreeing to last week.
Right. So why is all of this important?
Because
scope
said
creep.
So.
Because I said so. No. Bang. Why is it important? Scope creep, when it's not managed, and can cause quality issues, which can cause stress, undue stress for everyone. Everyone has to work overtime in order to meet deadlines. It can reduce profits because of that, and you wind up with unsatisfied customers and unsatisfied employees. Everybody gets all bent out of shape. So it's really important to reduce the amount of ambiguity, which will potentially, most times, reduce some of the scope creep. But you also have to realize and get used to scope creep. It's always going to be there. It's not going to go away. But, you want to minimize it as much as possible and have contingency plans to deal with it. And that's my 2 cents.
It's worth way more than 2 cents. Especially with inflation.
Yeah, that's true.
It is. That's it. Absolutely important. Let me just see if I can do this. So Amy says in her legal world that they do updates morning and afternoon every day when they get close to the deadline. And that they are also working on many sub-projects at a time. So I asked her if it was with everybody or just her team, and she says it's with the entire legal team, because every project manager coming to our team and don't realize who else is asking us to do stuff. So it's a matter of not just keeping everybody informed, but also helping to balance the workload so that people don't think that, there's 6 lawyers, but you're only working for me, which we've all been there too.
Exactly. Well, I would think legally with contracts and trial time, and you have to get to your timelines are extraordinarily tight. There's probably not a lot of wiggle room because you have to appear in court, I'm assuming, depending on what type of law you practice. But yeah, very important. Very important. Get out of jail free card. You got to make sure you have all your ducks in a row. And I think that about wraps it up. But you have anything to add on top of that, Kathleen? Anything going on?
No, I think that's got it all covered very nicely. Now, everybody's an expert on this, and they'll never have scope creep. That's not true. There's always going to be, just like Mary was saying. It's always going to be there. The whole point of this conversation really is to just help you minimize the impact it's going to have and to give you some tools to manage it when it comes along. Because in some cases, you're going to have to accept it and put it into the project. In other cases, you're going to be able to push it off onto something else or into a different, timeline. But now, hopefully, we've given you some different ways to look at it and to help identify which are the ones that need to go into which pile.
Right. And again, if you have any specific problems, please drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Definitely. And thanks again for joining us, and have a great night, everybody.
Yeah, thanks Kathleen? So much. We will see you again next week, same time, same place. And I forgot to look again. Do you remember what next week's is? I forgot.
What next week's thing is?
Yeah. Do you remember? No. Okay.
Oh, change is a good thing, right?
Oh, that's it. Okay, good.
That's when change isn't always what it's cracked up to be in some people's view, and how to deal with that.
And for those times when we can't remember what's coming up, you can join our mailing list, and we always send out so that you'll know what it's going to be. And on Facebook and YouTube, I'm scheduling the shows so that you'll get the notification. Fortunately, on Periscope, I can't do that yet. And I do want to just say, for the folks on Periscope, if you are sending comments and we're not responding, I do apologize. It is still an issue that evidently it's not just us, everybody is fighting with. And we will continue to try to make that better. But in the meantime, if you do have questions or comments that you wanted to get out that didn't make it, feel free to email us on the site, which actually I can bring up that little list here. One sec. I gotta drop that. Whoops, wrong one. So you can send us a tweet on Twitter. You can tweet at us or DM us, whatever you like. We're on Instagram, Periscope, Facebook, and YouTube. So whatever method you like, feel free to reach out, and we will make sure to spread the word. If you have your own suggestions on how to deal with this topic, that would be great too. Amy's been a huge help tonight. We appreciate that. But I am trying. I just want you folks on Periscope to know that I am trying to keep an eye on it, but it's wonky at best. If we fall into a pile of money, maybe we'll get a team together and build a tool for that. But not this week.
No, not this week. But in the meantime, put your fuzzy slippers on, relax, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And thanks for joining us, and see you next week. Kathleen, take us out.
So long, folks.